Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. The voice was sharp. It was young. It was drenched in the kind of self-assured authority that only comes from a freshly pressed uniform and an unblemished belief in the regulations manual. The old man didn't move. He sat on a small, metal stool near the edge of the vast concrete tarmac, looking for all the world like a piece of forgotten luggage. His back was stooped, a gentle curve that spoke of decades spent leaning over workbenches or peering into complex machinery. His hands, gnarled and stained with the ghost of old grease, rested on his knees. They were still, utterly still. Before him, the subject of all the day's tension sat in silent, magnificent failure. The X-51 Wyvern was less an aircraft and more a sculpted blade of midnight. Its composite skin seemed to drink the harsh desert sunlight, its angles too sharp, its lines too aggressive for a machine meant to be bound by gravity. It was the future, and it was broken. For 6 agonizing hours, teams of the Air Force's finest engineers and technicians had swarmed it like ants on a fallen god. They came with laptops and diagnostic rigs, with carts of gleaming, calibrated tools. They spoke in acronyms and technical jargon, their voices tight with frustration. The Wyvern remained inert. Its revolutionary plasma conduit engine, the heart of its legend, was cold. Lieutenant Kalen Vance of the security forces had no concern for the engine. His concern was the perimeter. His world was a neatly defined map of authorized zones, access lists, and security protocols. The old man on the stool was an anomaly, a glitch in the system. Did you hear me? Vance stepped closer, planting his polished boots in the old man's line of sight to the grounded jet. His posture was a rigid declaration of importance, chest out, arms crossed, jaw set. This is a restricted area. The old man slowly lifted his head. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, clouded by age but holding a depth that was unsettling. They weren't panicked or confused. They were patient. He looked at the young lieutenant as one might look at a weather forecast, noting its presence without alarm. "I was told to wait," the old man said. His voice was quiet, a dry rustle of leaves. Vance let out a short, incredulous laugh. A few of the younger airmen on the maintenance crew glanced over, smirking. Told by who? The ghost of aviation passed. Vance gestured vaguely at the controlled chaos around the jet. "As you can see, we have a situation here. We don't have time for civilian sightseers. I need to see your credentials and your authorization." The old man made no move for a wallet. Instead, he patted a long, narrow bundle on the stool beside him. It was a roll of thick, cracked leather, tied shut with a simple leather thong. It looked ancient, like something a frontier carpenter might have carried. "It's in the orders," he said, his gaze drifting back to the silent aircraft. "They said someone would know." This was the final straw for Lieutenant Vance. The sheer, placid absurdity of the old man was a direct affront to his authority. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was disrespect. "Right. The orders," Vance's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Let me guess, top secret, right? Delivered by a carrier pigeon." He took another step, looming over the seated figure. "I'm done asking. Stand up. You're coming with me to the security office. We'll sort out your orders there." The old man sighed, a soft, weary sound. He did not stand. He simply looked at the lieutenant's polished boots. "That wouldn't be productive, son." The word son landed like a spark on dry tinder. Vance's face flushed a deep, angry red. His entire career had been a fight against being seen as young, as inexperienced. He had memorized every regulation, aced every test, and enforced every rule with zealous precision to build a wall of competence around his youth. This frail, disheveled old man had torn it down with a single word. "That's it," Vance snapped. "You are now a security risk." He reached down, his hand clamping firmly on the old man's thin shoulder. "On your feet. Now." But his eyes were drawn to the leather bundle. It was the only thing the man possessed, the only clue to his purpose. Contempt and curiosity warred in the lieutenant's expression. "What's even in there, anyway?" he sneered, his free hand moving toward the leather roll. "Your collection of antique bottle openers? A magic wand?" For the first time, a flicker of something sharp appeared in the old man's pale eyes. His gnarled hand moved with surprising speed, not to stop Vance, but to simply cover the leather roll, protecting it. "I wouldn't," he said, his voice still quiet, but now with a core of tempered steel. It's not for you. This quiet act of defiance was more infuriating to Vance than any shout would have been. It was the calm refusal of a man who simply did not recognize the lieutenant's authority. It was unacceptable. You don't give the orders here, old man, Vance snarled. He shoved the old man's shoulder back, a short, jarring motion. Then he snatched the leather tool roll. This is now evidence. The moment Vance's fingers closed around the worn leather, his knuckles brushed against the back of the old man's hand. The world dissolved. For Silas Miller, the bright desert sun vanished, replaced by the flickering emergency lights of a cockpit. The smell of hot electronics and ozone filled his nostrils, thick and acrid. The distant shouts of the maintenance crew became the high, terrifying scream of a failing turbine at 60,000 feet. He felt the bone-deep cold of the stratosphere seeping through the metal skin of the experimental craft, the violent shudder of an airframe tearing itself apart. He saw his own hands, younger then, working frantically by the light of a single maglite, using a strange, custom-made spanner to bypass a fried plasma regulator. He could feel the pilot's ragged, panicked breathing through the intercom. He could feel the weight of it all, the lives, the secrets, the future, resting on the perfect fit of that one tool in his hand. The memory lasted only a second, but it left him breathless. He blinked, and the desert sun returned. Lieutenant Vance stood before him, a triumphant sneer on his face, holding the tool roll. See? Nothing to it, Vance said, fumbling with the leather thong. Across the tarmac, Master Sergeant Eva Rostova watched the entire exchange with a knot tightening in her stomach. She was a 30-year veteran of the Maintenance Corps. She had seen hot-headed lieutenants before. They were a common and predictable hazard, like FOD on a runway. But there was something different about this. It was the old man. He wasn't a trespassing civilian. Trespassers were nervous, agitated, or belligerent. This man was still. He sat amidst the high-tech chaos with the serene patience of a mountain. Rostova had offered him a cup of coffee an hour earlier, a small gesture of kindness. He'd accepted with a quiet, "Thank you, Sergeant," and when she'd asked his name, he'd just said, "Folks call me C." C. Miller. He didn't seem lost. He seemed like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, waiting for everyone else to catch up. Watching Lieutenant Vance, a man whose hands were softer than her own daughter's, physically shove a man who could be his great-grandfather, crossed a line. It wasn't just a breach of protocol. It was a breach of fundamental decency. Her instincts, honed by decades of diagnosing problems in complex machines and even more complex people, screamed that the lieutenant was making a catastrophic mistake. She pulled out her personal cell phone, turning her back to the confrontation. She had a number she hadn't called in years, a direct line to the aid of her first-wing commander, a man who was now a colonel at Air Combat Command Headquarters. It was a long shot, an abuse of an old privilege, but the knot in her gut told her it was necessary. The phone was answered on the second ring. Colonel Davis's office. "This is Master Sergeant Rostova at Edwards. I need to speak with the colonel. It's an urgent operational matter." She kept her voice low and steady. "The colonel is preparing for General Thorne's site visit. He's not available," the aide replied, his tone bored and dismissive. "The general's visit is why I'm calling," Rostova pressed, watching Vance begin to unroll the leather bundle. "There's a situation on the Wyvern tarmac. Security forces are detaining a civilian consultant, and I think they're making a serious error. Sergeant, a civilian dispute is a matter for the base command, not this office," the aide sighed. "His name is Miller," Rostova said, her voice dropping even lower. "C. Miller. He's an old man, carrying a roll of antique-looking tools. Lieutenant Vance is about to confiscate them." There was a pause, a beat of silence. "Repeat the name," the aide said, his voice suddenly sharp, all boredom gone. "Miller. Silas Miller." He said to call him C. The silence that followed was profound. It was a dead, empty space on the line that felt heavier than a shout. Rostova could hear the faint, muffled sound of the aide covering the phone, a panicked, urgent whisper in the background, then the sound of a door opening. A new voice came on the line. It was Colonel Davis himself, and his tone was one of barely suppressed panic. "Sergeant Rostova, this is Colonel Davis. Are you looking at Mr. Miller right now?" "Yes, sir." "The lieutenant has his tool roll." Listen to me very carefully. The colonel's voice was tight as a garrote wire. What is your exact location? Give me the tarmac number. And you are to keep that lieutenant away from him. I don't care how you do it. Trip him if you have to. Do not, under any circumstances, allow that officer to disrespect that man further. Is that understood? Sir, the lieutenant isn't going to listen to me. Sergeant, the colonel's voice was a gunshot. You have a direct order from me. Keep that line open. Help is on the way. Before Rostova could even process the order, a low rumble began to build in the distance. It wasn't a jet engine. It was the sound of multiple, heavy vehicles moving at speed. Lieutenant Vance had finally gotten the leather thong undone. He unrolled the bundle on the concrete with a theatrical flourish. Inside, nestled in worn felt pockets, were not the gleaming, laser-etched instruments of modern engineering. There were a half-dozen tools, forged from a dark, heavy steel. They were strange, elegant, and bespoke. One was a spanner wrench with a head bent at an impossible angle. Another was a caliper with markings that weren't metric or imperial. They looked like artifacts. Well, look at this, Vance sneered, picking up the odd spanner. You probably 3D printed this in your garage. This is a joke, he turned to the old man. You are in a world of trouble. The rumble was louder now, a sound that cut through the whine of generators and the anxious chatter of the crews. Heads began to turn. From the main access road, a convoy of 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans was bearing down on the tarmac at a speed that was utterly terrifying. They didn't slow for the checkpoints. They moved with the unstoppable purpose of an armored column, dust and gravel kicking up behind their tires. They screeched to a halt not 50 feet from the scene, doors flying open before the vehicles had fully settled. Men in dark suits and earpieces emerged, creating a perimeter with cold, professional efficiency. From the lead vehicle, the last man to emerge was General Marcus Thorne. Thorne was the commander of Air Combat Command. He was a living legend, a former test pilot whose picture hung in half the buildings on this base. He was a man who commanded fleets of invisible bombers and continent-spanning logistics. When he walked, the very ground seemed to stiffen to attention. Today, he wasn't walking. He was striding, and his face was a mask of cold fury. His eyes, famous for their piercing intelligence, were narrowed to slits. They swept past the gawking maintenance crews, past the saluting base commander who was now jogging frantically to catch up, and past a pale and utterly confused Lieutenant Vance. The general's eyes found the old man on the stool, and they locked. He moved with a terrifying purpose, his entourage struggling to keep pace. He walked directly to Silas Miller, ignoring everyone and everything else. The entire tarmac, a space of acres, seemed to shrink to the few feet of concrete separating the 4-star general and the quiet old man. General Thorne stopped precisely 1 foot in front of Silas. He took a deep breath. The fury on his face melted away, replaced by an expression of profound, absolute reverence. He snapped his heels together. His body went ramrod straight. He raised his hand in the sharpest, most perfect salute of his 40-year career. It was a salute of such precision and emotional weight that it seemed to make the air vibrate. Mr. Miller, the general's voice boomed across the now silent tarmac, raw with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. It is an honor, sir. Silas Miller looked up and gave a small, weary nod. Marcus, you made good time. General Thorne held his salute for a moment longer, then slowly lowered his hand. He turned, and his gaze fell upon Lieutenant Vance, who was still holding the strange spanner wrench as if it were a venomous snake. The general's eyes went from the tool in Vance's hand to the young officer's face, and the cold fury returned, now 1,000 times more potent for being quiet. Vance felt the general's stare like a physical blow. He felt the blood drain from his face. His mind was a frantic scramble of confusion and terror. General, sir, Vance stammered, his voice a squeak. This man, he had no credentials. He breached the perimeter. General Thorne didn't answer him. He didn't even seem to be breathing. Instead, he turned to face the assembled crowd of technicians, security personnel, and now, the entire base command staff who had materialized out of thin air. Do you people know who this is? The general's voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the tarmac. It was a voice accustomed to filling hangars and briefing rooms without a microphone. You look at him, and you see an old man. You see a disruption. A problem for your paperwork. He took a step closer to Silas, placing a hand gently on the old man's shoulder. You are standing in the presence of a ghost. A legend. This is Silas Miller. To those of us who know the real history of this Air Force, the history that isn't written on any plaque, we know him by another name. The general paused, letting the weight of his words settle. We call him the ghost of the Skunk Works. We call him the man who could listen to the wind over a wing and tell you where the stress fractures would be in 10 years. This man designed the inertial dampeners for the State Route 71 on the back of a cocktail napkin because the project's lead engineers said it was impossible. He fixed a fuel leak on AU-2 at 70,000 feet in flight, using a roll of duct tape and the foil from his chewing gum, saving the pilot and $1 billion of intelligence assets. A collective gasp went through the crowd. These were stories, myths, told in hushed tones in dive bars and maintenance bays. No one believed they were about a real person. He never wore a uniform, the general continued, his voice thick with passion. He never took a medal. He never even asked for a pension. He said the work was the only reward he ever needed. When we built this new engine for the Wyvern, he gestured to the dead jet. We based it on a plasma cycling system he blueprinted in 1978. A design so advanced, our modern computers are still trying to fully understand its genius. And when it failed today, when every diagnostic and every engineer with a PhD came up empty, I knew there was only one man on this planet who could possibly know why. He turned his head slightly, his voice softening as he spoke to Silas. They couldn't get the primary plasma injector to seat, said the housing was warped by less than a micron, but it was enough to break the circuit. Silas nodded slowly. It's not the housing, he said quietly. It's the harmonic resonance from the containment field. It creates a thermal ghost. You don't tighten the injector. You have to loosen it, let it find its own seat, then engage the magnetic clamps. You need the right tool to do it without shattering the focusing crystal. He pointed a crooked finger at the strange spanner in Vance's trembling hand. General Thorne's gaze snapped back to Lieutenant Vance. The quiet was gone. His voice was now a blade of ice. Lieutenant, this man's credentials are every single aircraft in our inventory that is still flying. His authorization is the fact that without him, that $50 billion prototype behind you becomes the world's most expensive paperweight. He didn't breach your perimeter. Lieutenant, this man is the perimeter. Men like him are the reason you even have a perimeter to guard. He took a step toward Vance, who flinched as if the general had struck him. I have your service record, Lieutenant. Perfect scores. Top of your class. You know the book cover to cover. But you have no judgment. You have no humility. You mistake age for weakness. You mistake silence for confusion. You put your hands on a man who has forgotten more about service and sacrifice than you will ever learn. The general's voice dropped to a near whisper, a lethal, precise register that was far more terrifying than a shout. You touched his tools. You stood there, in your immaculate uniform, earned by the sweat and blood of giants like him, and you mocked his life's work. You are a disgrace to that uniform. You are a disgrace to this command. Vance was white as a sheet, his body rigid with shock and shame. He looked as if he might collapse. But then, a quiet voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Marcus. It was Silas. He had slowly risen from his stool, a little unsteady on his feet. He walked over and gently took the spanner from Vance's nerveless fingers. The boy was doing his job, Silas said, looking at the general. He was following the book. The book just didn't have a chapter for me. He then turned his pale blue eyes to Vance. The anger and condescension were gone, replaced by a deep, soul-crushing shame. It's all right, son. Pride is a heavy boot. It's hard to feel the ground you're standing on when you're wearing it. This act of quiet grace was the final, devastating blow. Vance's composure finally broke. A single tear tracked its way down his cheek. General Thorne stared at the young lieutenant for a long moment. Mr. Miller has given you a gift, Lieutenant. The gift of grace. I will give you the gift of education. He turned to his aide. Colonel, you will create a new mandatory training course for all security forces personnel at this command, effective immediately. It will be a 1-month, intensive course on the history of this institution, focusing on the civilian pioneers and unsung heroes who built it. Its official designation will be the Miller Protocol. Lieutenant Vance and his entire squad will be the first attendees. Their first assignment, the general paused, a grim satisfaction on his face, will be to personally clean and polish, by hand, every single historical marker and memorial plaque on this base. Perhaps if they read the names, they will learn some respect. He turned back to Silas, his entire demeanor softening once more. See, your old call sign is still active on the command net. Hammer 6, the final authority on any mechanical problem. The team is waiting for you. Silas nodded, clutching his tool roll. He walked toward the silent wyvern, and the crowd of high-paid engineers and technicians parted for him like the sea before Moses. They watched in awed silence as the stooped old man approached the futuristic machine, a ghost walking out of the past to save the future. 3 months later, a much-changed Kalen Vance sat in a small off-base diner, nursing a cup of coffee. He was no longer a lieutenant. After completing the Miller Protocol, a grueling month of history lessons, manual labor, and deep introspection, he had requested a voluntary demotion to second lieutenant and a transfer to a training command. He wanted to learn from the ground up, to earn the uniform he now understood he had only been borrowing. The bell over the diner door jingled. Silas Miller walked in, moving slowly toward a booth in the corner. He looked exactly the same. Worn jacket, simple pants, the quiet stillness of a man at peace with the world. Vance's heart hammered in his chest. He took a deep breath, stood up, and walked over to the old man's booth. Silas looked up, his pale eyes showing a flicker of recognition. "Mr. Miller," Vance began, his voice steady but humble. "Sir, I needed to apologize. For my conduct that day. For my arrogance. There's no excuse for it. I was wrong." Silas looked at the young man for a long moment, studying his face. He saw the change there. The brittle pride was gone, replaced by a quiet solemnity. He gestured to the seat opposite him. "Vance Saturday. The book tells you the rules, son," Silas said after a moment, stirring his coffee. "But it doesn't tell you why the rules matter. It can't teach you to see the person standing in front of you." He took a sip. "You're learning to see now. That's good." He offered a small, knowing smile. It was a smile of forgiveness, of understanding. It was absolution. Vance felt a profound weight lift from his shoulders. He nodded, unable to speak. He simply sat in the presence of the quiet legend, a student once more, finally learning the most important lesson of all. True strength wasn't in the regulations or the rank on your collar. It was in the quiet dignity of a job well done, and the grace to see the hero hidden in plain sight.